So thank you very much for joining us for this last lecture in the series, Machine Visions, which is a lecture that we organize at the School of Arts in conjunction with a class on artificial intelligence and photography. And the co-presenters for this evening are South Asia Institute. Thank you very much to Sharani Mitra for joining us for that, and the Department of Film, which is why we're in the Lifetime Screening Room, also known in some quarters as Dodge 511. So, thank you and welcome. Shaina and Ashok said not to read their bio, but I have to read a little bit of it, even though people have seen it on the website as well. So CAMP very specifically insists that they're not an artist collective, but rather a studio in which ideas and energies gather and become interests and forms. They were formed in 2007 by Shaina Anand, Sanjay Bangar, and Ashok Sukumaran. And today we've got Shaina and Ashok with us to present their work. We have them here partially because of the excellent convergence that they are 2024-2025 visiting fellows at the Center for Experimental Ethnography at the UPenn. A week ago, I was actually in Philadelphia and managed to see them presenting in what is now a space called Public Trust, formerly known as the Slot Foundation, where they presented, among other things, one of their first projects I've seen, which is Gulf to Gulf to Gulf. Also worth mentioning, and since by the time anyone sees this recording, it will be public knowledge, we can say it, that next year they will have a solo show titled Video After Video at the Museum of Modern Art, soon to be announced. So we'll have you back in the spring for a very long overview of their work. I will let Shaina and Ashok talk about their practice in the context of technology, hand-cranked, etc. But I will just share one little anecdote. We've known each other for many years, and one of the things they're really good at is what I would say is they're very good fire starters. They'll start something and then you'll have to run with it. I had a project where I had done interviews in Bangladesh for a year around the 1971 Liberation War, and that project sat undigitized for 20 years before I met them once, and they said, wait, what format is it in? High-8 tape, okay, we have a high-8 deck, just we'll take it back to Bombay, and it was still Bombay back then, officially. We'll go and digitize it. And then they started this project, which is on Padma, which they'll also talk about, which on my part, it hasn't been finished yet because of my own time management issues, but it is a very good example of how they take material that you think you know really well and find ways to footnote, annotate, and expand the meaning. And we'll get some of that today in the presentation as well.
I hope so.
So with that, Shaina and Ashok, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this clear? Can you hear me? Okay. So, welcome. We are going to do a very quick, because this is a short presentation in the context of the class and the AI theme. So we'll start by a little bit of background, like trying to talk about our coming to terms with and our kind of anti-AI position in general, but then using specific tooling in the context of a project that we'll explain at the end. So it helps to, I guess, frame it a little bit. We are interested in this idea of this intelligence beyond the single author. Right? We are interested in this idea within our studio practice, within the whole point was, the logic of that was that there isn't the classical author of art. Right? And that we are attempting to, in many, many projects, to access a kind of a group intelligence, right? And in, let's give a specific example of a translation of the term general intellect, which comes from Marx, but that has been used extensively over the last 2 decades to talk about a kind of intellectual labor, right? And the capture of intellectual labor by things like artificial intelligence. So our translation of that has been, for example, in the form of, to talk about a specific project that Naeem mentioned, Padma, which is a footage archive, which very briefly could show you, that's the front page, pad.ma. And it contains a lot of things that basically were taken with the intention of making films from them, but then films were only 1, 2, 3% of all this labor, right? So the intellectual labor, the activities, the social knowledge that is contained within society when filmmakers attempt to capture it in film production only manages to accommodate, usually literally, a few percent of what you have filmed. So Padma is a footage archive that contains lots of interesting things. For example, very quickly, these are all the 1,244 raw takes that comprised the film Ship of Theseus, a very wonderful experimental sort of fiction about the movement of organs, among other things, philosophical essay film. But here are all the 1,244 takes, and what this allows you to do, I mean, even in the context of a fiction film, just giving you a couple of examples, is to look for the same shot taken like 6 times and then identify the one that was used and sort of investigate why that was the one that was used and what was left out of the film, right? That is one. But then there's other things like, for example, all the footage of this film called Slum Bombay from 1991, which of course far exceeds the remit of the film, the size of the film itself, I would say by about 10 times, right? The footage that we were able to recover and so on. So these are small examples of, and we'll sort of revisit that in a second, of this idea that Marx was talking about, that there was not just labor but also intelligence that was being captured in social forms that were capitalistic, let's say, right? And so our translation of the idea of general intellect is important as a backdrop to what we're talking about today, briefly, right? The second was that we used a particular strategy to talk about material, and I'll try to explain why we were doing this, right? In projects like Padma and its sister project IndianCine.ma, which is basically an encyclopedia of Indian film, which we say every time we present this has more material than the National Film Archive, which is true, that we invented a kind of particularly nerdy relationship with metadata, right, which is data about the object. And we're trying to come to what AI likes to harvest, right? So, and that struggle. So metadata is things we write about the film, the name of the director, the song, the name of the songs in it, the length of the film, and so on and so on. These are traditional metadata terms. And what was interesting for us is that to expand that idea of metadata way beyond the normal use was a way to create another world around the object that's not the object itself, right? So it was on top of films. An entire universe could be built by people annotating it, by people adding, songbooks, a lot of the stuff that goes on in IndianCine.ma today, right? For us, metadata was a way of going past the copyright of the object and creating everything about the film but the film itself that was freely accessible, right? So it was a way also, in a way, to create a kind of access to Indian cinema, which could be fueled by metadata, right? So to give you a couple of small examples, since somebody was talking about Christian Marclay's clock, we have had this telephone cut of Indian cinema for a very, very long time, which was done in a couple of hours compared to Marclay's army of assistants working for 3 years. And it contains 117 phone calls from Indian film, identified really quickly by a friend of ours. And it's quite entertaining, right? So the idea that we could very quickly do these collections of material, these supercuts, these were automated, they're organized by year, you can see the phones change, you can see the colors change, you can go back to famous phone calls, and so on, right? So, and then 1982 and so on. I'm just showing you a few fun examples, right, of our use of metadata to access cinema in a different way.
हेलो बड़ी गुलाबी सी है.
Okay. And one more quick example of this is the difference between something seen in an image and when people speak about it, right? So in Padma, the footage archive, I'm just playing you this from this edit called Photo Montage, which intercuts between photography, since that's the class here, I just want to give you a quick example, between people talking about photography, that is in speech, and photographs in the image. So that's, you recognize this person, probably a younger version. This is Arundhati Roy in Bangalore talking to Conrad Becker about surveillance. And so the word photography shows up in a particular context, right?
If you go to Kashmir, they just laugh about our problems about being photographed, because there it's like, you can't move 5 kilometers without having a AK-47 in your face. There isn't a single Kashmiri boy, I don't think, that hasn't had the hell beaten out of him every week or so, So then how do you control that society? You know how they'll control it. They'll control it by creating a class of, up to now the government has approached it like a traditional battle, The Kashmiri Muslims are terrorists, and then now it's different. Now it's, let's create a corporate elite. Let's create the divisions between them. And then that battle that they're fighting now will seem like an old one.
For example. And this is Shaina holding a...
Wow, it looks like a family photograph.
inside a CCTV control room in
Oh,
Manchester.
Same man as we took before.
Pictures of incidents being captured by the police, right?
Some good image.
So it's just a small example to say that the nature of metadata allowed us to make these very interesting sort of forms of access, we thought, right? That is the primary assumption of these kinds of projects. And so, okay, I have something else? Yeah. When we come to large bodies of material, I think this is where the social, the relationship between the human and the machine labor process can be talked about. It's been sort of 10, 15 years of this kind of process. And just to give you a very quick other example, which connects to our previous talk in Columbia, where we showed this, is just a history of what happened when a set of phone taps made by the government of a lobbyist, very senior level lobbyist, talking to both Reliance and the Tatas. Her phone taps, a very small part of her phone taps were leaked. There was a public call for transcription, right, which is a form of metadata that then allowed all of us to think through, access, search, and operate on these tapes. But the sort of canonical, I guess, link to the final, sort of, let's say, the most detailed collection of metadata, including transcripts, on these tapes lies within Padma, right? So, of course, you can search this collection for any word spoken in the dialogue, just as you can search Indian cinema for any word spoken in the dialogue of thousands and thousands of films, right? So it allowed you a kind of access. So what does this have to do with AI? Let's just go back to our next example, which was that what we were trying to build, I think, were not just kind of collections of material like taken from small bits of cinema or footage and so on, but really also a way to cite them back, right? the whole point of Indian cinema was that not only could you search for any word spoken in the dialogue, but you could link to it from outside. Right? So what we were really talking about, or the imagination was really very much that we want to allow you to cite film as if you would cite scholarly work. We allow you to cite page 14 in Jane Bhi Do Yaro instead of in the sociologist's boring book on Bombay. So that was what the context of what we were doing was. And therefore, we sort of deferred, or we were very unhappy with when AI tooling came around, that a lot of it, now some AI LLMs try to give you citations, but a lot of them, a whole generation of them, basically obscured this part, which we thought was very central to the idea of the digitized metadata chain, and that chain extending all the way to human labor and so on, right? So in order to keep that chain alive, we were really wanting to retain these paths to prior labor and to prior sources, which I think AI breaks, which is why our friends are very upset with it, especially. So let's talk about a specific. So we tried various AI tools over the years on Padma and Indian cinema, image detection. We trained LLMs on this data. We tried to do lots of things which, are now quite common. And I think there were two. It all resulted in a very anti-AI sentiment, especially among software programmers who are central to these projects, core friends of ours, Jan, Xenia, etc. Because they were finding that a lot of the precise work that they were doing was being undone by this form of access, right? And one of the arguments they made that if we use machine learning tools to do, for example, identification of physical scenes, like objects in the scene and so on, and if they hallucinated, then we would really be polluting our search. That means we would be filling our metadata with junk, right? And this is partly the reason why we, 3 or 4 years ago, I think, made the first decision to not do any AI on this data set, on the data sets that we have. So that's one of the, let's say, reasons for that, right? But at the same time, we intensively use it, the tooling, for two use cases. One of them is transcription, because as you can see here, a lot of Padma depends on transcripts that are generated now, that used to be generated by hand, that are now generated by AI tool and checked by hand. And two, translations, which are not good enough yet for many cases. I mean, Naeem is having this problem, but are decent for a large number of cases. And I don't have time to get into this in detail because the project we're showing is really something else. But we have been doing, for example, translation from Marathi newspaper collections to English, which seems to be 80% okay. And we mark it very specifically as a machine translation, right? So maybe I can find what's our Mojus collection. Oh, this is Indian cinema, that's why it's sorry. So documents, source Mojus. This person who's been, it's a collection which has been, collecting news reports about the coastal road over a very, very long time. And we mark this over here. So this is the auto-generated OCR. That means that it extracts the Marathi language from the image. This is not an AI tool. It's an older generation sort of tool. And then we get automated translation, and we mark this as an automation translation because when you say dive into the succubus, we are not sure entirely if that means dive into the succubus at all, right? So in order to not pollute the search for a large data set, we cannot use AI without supervision. Okay, so that's just one of the backdrops to what we're doing. One more thing maybe was that, nevertheless, as artists, we continued to explore various ideas and projects, one of which Shaina will talk about briefly. And I wanted to just mention this idea of how montage and this next token, you know what next token is? It's the kind of thing that AI, language models especially, are only concerned about the next few words, right, that they're generating. They don't have a sense of the large horizon. They depend a lot on just following the path, right, of the next few words. And this has something to do with ideas of montage and has been explored in a large number of, let's say, filmic works. Some classic ones I would just mention is cdoc.org, which is done by the same, which is coded by, which is a work by Ho Tzu Nen, which is currently showing at Bard, which is a generative or recombinant cinema, which is a different film every time being played from thousands and thousands of clips of so-called Southeast Asia. It's quite a beautiful work, and you can go to any letter and the film starts playing from there. And so Jan coded this, right? Our friend who also works on Padma, but wasn't happy with or let's say wasn't sure about what the randomness was doing overall to the narrative. We had a discussion where I said that it's edging towards being utterly random almost, and that doesn't make for good montage, right? And then very briefly, I wanted to show how to turn this off. I wanted to show one photo montage, physical sequence line of pictures that we made out of a newspaper archive, and I'll just play it with the audio narration so you'll understand maybe. We set up a particular set of rules by which a picture would draw the next one in the sequence, right? 1937, a tall man called Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Frontier Gandhi, stands next to a Karachi-based Gandhi and Chaitra Idwani, an unknown porter standing in the train door. 3 years later, Khan is surrounded in the inside of the train by people, among them a young full-turbaned Sikh, and at an unknown frontier location, at an unknown time, Khan is surrounded by members of the non-violent army he organized, called the Khudai Khidmatkars, or Red Shirts. In 1969, a much older Khan is seen in a painted photograph breaking a fast next to JP or Jayaprakash Narayan, who would soon become a key anti-Congress figure in the emergency. 16 years later, Khan's knees are up as he sits in Congress centenary celebrations in Delhi. A day earlier, he was in a wheelchair being received by a delegation at Palam Airport, including a dark-suited man named Rajiv Gandhi. So it goes on. It's a long line of newspaper photographs that have been rendered as cutouts, but the point there is that we were generating a handmade algorithm that was finding the next photograph. And what we were interested in is the causal relationship, or the aging of a person, the relationship of one event to the next, and so on, right? So what we were trying to establish via a kind of a algorithmic process, which people like Matteo Pasquinelli claim goes back all the way to religious rituals and so on, that abstraction was really about trying to find cause or potential cause in these kind of sequences. So I'll stop there and let Shaina talk about one quite small project which the one line I had to say was that here the next token is after life itself, which is not this very common trend in AI to extrapolate somebody's life to say, Michael Jackson speaking, blah, blah, in generative AI or deepfake video. But here it's sort of turned around, and I'll let Shaina say more about it.
You have to VJ.
I have to VJ. Okay,
Yeah.
go.
I don't know your machine. So the work that was on the poster and sort of foregrounded in the blurb for the machine vision talk. So here's the AI project. We're coming to it. So many of you may or may not know. Can you put the Jerry's thing?
Yeah.
So many of you may or may not know about India's first contemporary or modern art gallery. It's pretty much a household name in India. It's a commercial art gallery, but it nonetheless has been credited for literally the birth of modern art in India. And the founders of this gallery, who you saw on our poster, is this Parsi couple, very young, in their 20s here, Keku and Khurshid Gandhi. And they've been seen as the moving progressive force behind contemporary art in India. At the same time being international ambassadors, parent figures to hold two generations of artists, and also being art dealers, right? So it's a very unusual kind of space, impresarios, patrons, and so on. But not many know that Kemult, this gallery that I'm saying is a household name, has its origins, the name comes from Chemical Molding Company, which was a frame shop set up by Keku Gandhi and his father pre-independence, just after World War II, along with a Belgian World War II refugee whose family had dealt in chemical molding frames, basically. So new technology that was brought to India. The frame shop still exists on Princess Street and still frames much of the art that is produced in the city and also in the country. But back in the day, this frame shop needed art to be put in the frame, and along with goddesses and gods that were framed with these, gorgeous chemical molded frames, the faking carvings, basically. They began showcasing the work of the PAG, or the Progressive Artist Group, that had been formed just that year in JJ School of Art down the street from where the frame shop was. This is, if you can just scroll a bit down. Yeah, just to give you some context of the gallery so that I spend less time on the legacy of the gallery. But on a personal note, as someone who grew up in Bombay, on the edges of the art and activism scene, both Keku and Khurshid, in my young adult days, were towering figures, people you could trust, specifically in that generation and that time, right? Bombay changed to Mumbai in 1995 when I was 20. Babri Masjid was demolished 96. The pogroms in Gujarat happened 2002. So in those sort of young adult days of growing up and understanding art, wanting to make art in the city, both their home and their gallery really became a safe house to organize, to come together, to fundraise. And for a generation before that, during the emergency, which is the year I was born, it was the same. And at that point, it was really a safe house, right? People underground were being hidden in their homes and stuff. So they do, there's a role that they play, as the title here says. And there's a line at the bottom here. Let's scroll down. Can a gallery be a responsible citizen? So they do. They do hold that legacy, and that question does get answered by a lot of the work they do. Last year, Kemul Gallery turned 60, and this friendship that I had as a very young artist with Keiko Gandhi in my 20s, continued as a friendship with, and also Ashok's friendship with, and Camp's friendship with Shireen Gandhi, who now helms the gallery. And last year, Kemul turned 60, and they were doing this big 60-year anniversary show, and they called it Kemulding, Futuring and Framing. And while most of the show involved the roster artists who were invited to show their work or to make new work for this as a sort of a homage to 60 years of Kemuld, we're not gallery artists. We're not on their roster. We have no, commercial relationship with them other than this one of friendship and solidarity that, time and time again keeps making us turn to this history of their parents. And one of the entire show was supposed to be around the archive, right? And the Kemul galleries and the parents' personal archives had finally been archived. And what that meant was a professional group of archivists came and put these things into fussy fonts and boxes. That's all they did. And so the prompts to the artists were come in to use the archive to make new work. And the moment we got into opening these fussy boxes, we realized the wrong things were put in the wrong boxes. 63 was in 75, and and the fact that you could just change this by changing metadata was driving us crazy. And soon the sort of errors weren't just taxonomy and metadata. They started becoming very interpretative. The archive was full of like art world hubris and larger than life personalities and unreliable narrators. And a lot of it, can you show the next slide? A lot of it went into things like this book, right? That or a lot of things were being written through the archive, and it was a bit, it was funny. It was also moving how much of the sort of art history that gets produced was just sometimes off, like historically by a decade, or in many ways also in terms of legacies and things. So this is where we came in. Like I said, we were troubled and moved. Both with Keiku's mercurial personality and Khorshid as someone who, she wrote copious letters. If she cared about a cause, she was out there, right? She would write letters to Nehru and expect a reply. She wrote long letters to Indira through the emergency. She wrote letters to artists. And in this sort of our post-truth, fake news era, we almost felt compelled to say that if these two were alive, what would they be doing? And so we created these digital avatars, or these personas of Keiku and Khorshid. Everyone who came to the show, it was just a gift to the gallery and to them, right? So almost everybody knew they had passed in 2012 and 2013. So there's a persona here that's being created, right? Which is very different from a deep fake of someone who's living. And many of them knew them quite intimately, right? So that uncanny resemblance for where they had to read through the anachronisms in the work to, of course, realize this is filmed like a week ago and not, when they were, 80 and 84 respectively. So we'll play you some of it, a short clip. Started? Yeah. Just wait, yeah. And just to...
You should say when.
2012 and 2013, I did.
But this project was last year.
This project is last year, in the 60th anniversary. The gallery opened in 1963. Keiku was played by his cousin brother, who's 92 years old. and does bear resemblance to Kiku, whereas Khorshid was played by someone who has no resemblance to her, nonetheless someone who knew that art world milieu well and has lived through it. Jennifer Mirza, she's also the wife of a very noted filmmaker Saeed Mirza, who interestingly spends a lot of her time assiduously fact-checking. And she'll send these things back on WhatsApp, right? She'll just keep rewriting over the sort of revisionist history that's being thrown at us each day. So yeah, it was a quite intimate coming together of collaborators, both from the family, but also the sort of milieu around us
the AI part?
at camp.
Just to say what
The work is called Deep Facts. And yes, it does what's called a deep fake using the AI face morphing technology called deep face. So there you have a play on deep face, deep fake, deep facts. And we can come to that later, but watch some of it. And it's done in this very classic lecture performance, kind of awkward kind of performance art, video art that we see sometimes. But also, as a nod to these classic plays, Tumhari Amrita, which was a very well-known stage play in India, or Love Letters, where, two people sit across a table and read to each other.
That's the Hussein, the one you all accuse me of selling secretly for BMC road repairs.
That year, Temur also turned 50. Prabhu sent us this card after we had both passed on.
You wrote in your last request, "Don't cry for me, Argentina may be sung." At Shivaji Park Crematorium?
No, can't be.
Our 40-year catalog has a big Hirata sticker inside.
What a mess.
It says Geeta Kapoor's essay is now a separate pullout.
In her essay in the supplement, she writes, a stainless steel dressing table with a mirror designed by Bharti Kher and Preeti Kaur, complete with steel lipstick, Prado high heels, and a sari in folded steel. Prado high heels. That's such a Freudian mistake. Geeta was probably thinking of the Prado Museum and not Prada.
The I prefer non-alcoholic, please sort. Sip the ganda ka ras and munch the yummy veg dumplings. Among the Elvis pelvic thrust impersonators for the evening were art critic Girish Shahane. Another overzealous guest was seen unbuttoning another shirt. Alas, a full Monty was averted eventually.
Who's saying this? Bombay Times?
No, Asian Age. After an hour of hip-shaking Arabic harem music, the DJ had the crowd getting nostalgic and doing a jig to Sting's Susanna.
Sorry, Susanna was not a song by Sting. It was a Dutch band, VOF de Kunst, aka the Art Company.
She says, I think I'd better go. She says goodbye, and I say no.
Susanna, I'm watching all the art, what everyone is doing, saying, showing, online and print, everywhere.
How long will you watch?
Oh, maybe another 100 years? then we will see.
Cool. That's just to show you the actor who was playing. Sorry. So that's. Oop, oop. And sorry. Where's the other one?
Further down.
No, I don't seem to. Oh yeah. That's the actor playing
Press play.
Keiko.
Hussein was really fascinated with her.
Play,
That's,
play. Call.
yeah. So you get the idea, right?
Press play.
Play this. Somehow not playing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just in full screen, it doesn't like it. So I'll play short. So you saw that, and I'll play this.
Hussein was really fascinated with her.
So it's also the voice is an AI version of his voice. That's her.
You don't want to talk about other things too.
So, wait.
None of these books about us say anything about European.
And that's
Piano.
and so on. This is the training. So they were trained on images from a video in Padma. So they're actually relatively low resolution imagery. The faces are 512 pixels. You can look up, if you like, the GitLab of Deepface Lab, which had some problems with fake generation of fakes of all kinds. And so last week, this repository has been archived and is now cannot be added to, read only. Part of this is sort of 3 years old, but that's their Deepface Lab. That was the tool, the set of tools we were using, right? Make everything okay. Unfortunately, there's no such button. But a lot of sort of slightly dodgy sites also use this. But yeah, that's their sort of cultural take on it. And finally, in an article which I think Naeem mentioned briefly in our introduction, with a lawyer that is published in the Hindustan Times about this work, he was really concerned about, rightly so, about the use of deepfake in political narratives emerging just prior to the elections. And actually, other friends of ours who are working in fact-checking had told us that 99% of sort of this kind of video fake news is just relabeling, like the wrong metadata rather than deepfake generation, right? People label a violent event as something else. So the deepfake, the level of trust in the image is quite low anyway, and so you don't need very sophisticated deepfakes. You just use you use events out of context, right? That's the primary form of video fake news. And the last point, I think, was that in that article, we spoke a little bit about the legal challenges to this extended persona, right? The fake person, the extended person who lives forever and wants to correct their own, everything being said about them, and the possible sort of legal status of such an extended person. Okay, thank you very much. We'll happily take questions.
And I just want to add that what Keiko and Khurshid set out to do is pretty much what we do in Padma, right? And I think it's these are urgent deeds that we all need to do in our work. And personal and political lives, right? Go back and reinterpret archives, annotate, annotate, annotate. It's, correct. It's not just marginalia. Make it public and make it sensible. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ashok and Shaina, for that wonderful deep dive. Many branches there. For some people in the audience, the names might have been unfamiliar, and for those for whom it is familiar, there are a lot of inside references as well. There were certain things where I kept thinking, oh, how did you get away with that? And for that, knowing who that person is and their position in society, living or passed away, is very important. So we're a small, intimate crowd. We're going to have questions from the audience. I'm going to pass around the mic because we're recording the session for those who couldn't make it. But I'm going to give everyone a minute to collect your thoughts and think of questions. I will just lead off with a question that's been on my mind and maybe also just a way to generate other synaptic firing in people's heads. In the class, we talk quite a bit about this concept of synthetic backwash. As the programs are generating more and more, we look at images, more and more images which are out there in the ecosystem and can be then digested by new programs as original, since often they're not tagged, other than Adobe's initiative to get things tagged as created by AI and a few others. Vast majority of the images out there are not tagged in any way whatsoever. So the machine is already digesting images that it doesn't even know is generated by other images. And so I was struck by the thing that you said also, because you've talked a lot about Yan, and I know,
Yes.
what kind of perspective Yan comes from, that there was resistance to whatever AI dealings you're doing. There was resistance to introducing any of that into Padma as an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I'm also struck by the fact that in my dealings with Padma, with the Bangladesh project, one is the translation issue, but the other thing is, of course, we are very used today to programs that have very very dumbed down interfaces. And Padma requires a lot more just working with your fingers, keyboard, head. It's much more engaged, which can make it slow going if you become so used to GUIs of a certain kind. So if you could talk a little bit more just about that, whole thing where there was resistance, and I guess somehow then you kind of got around it as well.
No, I would just think that the levels of hallucination, even now, in a straightforward transcription of an Indian voice in speaking English, are dangerous. Like in the sense that if you're not monitoring it, they are creating noise, which is very hard to find later, right? Unless it is marked as such and so on, right? So just because of the nature of the indexical relation we were trying to keep, right? Retain the chains of reference. We didn't want to throw some random blobby thing at it. I mean, originally, I think that is also where a lot of the concerns came from, that could, just throw off a lot of, say, search, right? Because if it was indexed to certain words that were spoken, even in your case, like recently when you were doing Bangla, like there's this kind of repetition, 10 times repeated word, right? LLMs we were using on local LLMs, recently testing, that was just me fooling around, invented this completely fake story about a film made by a friend of ours saying it's an anti-national film. Even the language, like where it came from, is amusing. So we didn't want to add like random phraseology into what was trying to be relatively precise set of moves. So I think that's one obvious point where that sort of came from. And I think so the hallucinations level are still pretty high in publicly available things you can run without accessing Google servers or OpenAI servers and so on. So we are all watching this situation, obviously, because it does affect us. We said very early on, archive or be archived. Like if you don't have a position on it, like somebody else will have a position. Like there's always somebody who's doing the metadata of the metadata, right? So there's always like giant sucking machines trying to extract value from your data set. And in some ways you can't protect it because of its open source nature, also because of the fact that we don't own those films, or we have a relationship that is open source in every possible way. So I think all those things sort of are in play at the moment, but currently, and we had this discussion like 3 weeks ago as well, there is not a clear sense that it's useful for us inside the specific ecosystem of Padma and Indian cinema. And if we just jump onto it because everybody's doing it, like chat with Indian film theorists or whatever, we're not sure that that's so useful at the moment, even though offline, several of us would be playing with I have Olama running on this machine. I can show you there's a lot of garbage as well.
Yeah, to just answer your question, Naeem, about this sort of absorption, right? You become content for someone else. And just here we were, how many? In mid-September when semester opened, doing a talk with the extractive media group. And we were kind of trying to write a 10 thesis on vertical integration. And one of the theses was how not to simply be content, right? For the gallery or for the big producers, right? And I think that's one of the things at camp, it's one of the fires, right? That kind of keeps us going. And it takes me back to when we started Padma. It was before YouTube. Or YouTube, I mean, not before, but like before YouTube, even in the subcontinent was getting popular. We still had dial-up internet. It was before Facebook, for sure. And it was same time, 2007. Yeah, Facebook only for Ivy League at that point. But we came from that generation where the internet was the forest, right? It's where you could hide, organize, build, and build across, right? Say, enter the river of time sideways. And those things were just stupid, things that were being built all around us. And slowly everyone sleepwalked into FANGs, right? Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, whatever. But we were staying with the trouble trying to build something different, right? And that time-based annotation that's so salient inside in the archive has been around since 2007, right? And it was very much, as Ashok said, the labor and the general intellect, right? Like we all logged footage as filmmakers. We transcribe all of it, we translate all of it, we annotate, we put marginalia, we put the time date stamps and metadata. And in films you make many language subs, right? So, and now take that time-coded, time-based annotation and begin to interpret, right? Where it matters, argue with it, interpret, right? And so it's really something like that I'm trying to say, right? These are urgent things that we need to keep doing more so now in this AI moment and post-truth moment. And if the interface is fussy, I mean, come on, so is Premiere Pro, right? Like you have to mark in point, out point, and add, and yeah.
Hi, it's so nice to kind of see this kind of practice. Like for me, AI has been a very like a black box, I don't know much about it. So it's like a kind of good entry into kind of, how to play around with it. But my question, I think, I just, want to hear a bit more about your engagement with Marx and, like Marxist thinking and general intellect. And just a bit more fleshing out kind of the conceptual infrastructures, or what is it that like leads you to kind of think with that angle. And I guess I'm thinking a lot about general intellect.
So the person who I think joins it for us to the AI question is critic and author called Matteo Pasquinelli. He has a book called In the Eye of the Master, which maybe your class has been reading. And that has the argument sort of in reverse that, it is not only intellect which is being, knowledge that is being captured, but AI is a history of labor, right? I mean, because the whole point of the general intellect argument was that labor and knowledge and skill and sort of social relations are joined. They cannot be separated out. And so Marx has an intuition that it's not only physical labor, but also intellectual labor that is being exploited, right? And so for the Italian Marxists and autonomists and so on, like post, in more recent years, the creative labor dimension has been very important in their critique of, and therefore in the information landscapes, there has been this attempt to produce commons around that, to acknowledge creative labor as also being exploited, to not talk about immaterial labor, and so on as outside of the framework of value and things like that. So in a way, it comes from that, and there are critiques of Pasquinelli's book that it's really not coming from, even though he says it's a bottom-up view, it's maybe not bottom-up enough, or it's not an ethnographic kind of account. It's really still talking about like the known discourses and figures, let's say. But still, it's one of the people who say, let's say, would make that jump in reverse would be to say now that it's not only knowledge that's being extracted, but like it's the history of labor. Like AI is a history of, is an extraction of all the labor that went into all these projects, right? I mean, that's the argument. So that's sort of one way of saying it. We were using it just to talk about this sort of, the sort of approach in these projects, which is that the material, the social of, say, making a film isn't the film itself is a very small part of that whole sort of the skill, the duration, the time, the effort, the intentions of making a film. For example, long interviews of people 2 hours long that are cut into like 20 seconds in the average film. Right? So the film economy somehow like reduces this very beautiful formation of encounters into some kind of 60-minute product, right? I mean, not all films, and some films do this beautifully, so. But in general, we found that was an interesting situation, and therefore, like, other voices than the filmmaker. So yeah, we were also talking about the authorial cut maybe can expire in 30 years, right? I mean,
beyond the remit.
The person who cut out that piece saying, oh, I don't think audiences will understand this, or I don't want to see this now. That intention could expire, or could expire, like the day after, or it could, or let's say, but that's the risk of editing. But in certain cases, and as we've tried to show, like overall, that the footage has its own life, and that's the way we were thinking about the non-authorial relation with film, or broader than just the single artist vision, cut here, shoot there, stop, start, like that kind of directorial intention, because it's a large group of people working in a. So that's my.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to that. When we set up Padma in 2007, I think very clearly remember the questions we put on the table, right? If we have to build a non-state archive of the contemporary, and by contemporary I meant like say 80s onwards, what medium would it be? It had to be video. Who would be its custodians as well as contributors? So that sort of peer driven thing. It would be the cultural worker, filmmaker, artist, activist, like this group of people. And where would it be? Internet. And what would it contain? And that's where it was the footage. And I think one of the things there was that, where do you, on a scalar level, where do you place yourself, right? And if we can consider our peers, generally like at that point, a group of like documentary Bhadralok, or like well-educated, with certain privileges, a bunch of, we were always saying, we don't have budget, we don't have screens, as in venues to show. We're working hard. These are personally and politically motivated things, and yet we always were filming another ethnographic subject, right? So there's all this other primitive accumulation in that material, and so the idea of wanting to archive it was also to say, okay, we can't undo certain like violences or, just the history and baggage of documentary film, but at least we can redistribute it and do it in an equitable way, right? So what do you do when you have accumulated certain kind of resources? You should just share. And of course, then if we all do this and we do it carefully, right? Everyone was like, you want us to take out those high 8 and mini DV boxes from under our beds in those shoe boxes, and then go back to like handwritten or Excel sheet typed logs. We're like, yeah, we can marry them. And that was the start.
I was curious about what the actual process of like accumulating these videos is sort of, because how do you go about actually like obtaining them, and is there something to do with copyright? Sort of how does that work with your system, and the filmmakers who actually make the videos, sort of how do you go about communicating with them? And
yeah. So Padma is the footage archive and Indian Cine.ma is the film archive, and so Indian cinema is a pirate archive. We're not asking big Bollywood producers or art film Criterion Collection masters who are dead and gone for their films, right? It's taken, and it's in fact used in film studies departments, including here, for free all the time in the classroom, and it's an amazing resource, right? Padma, on the other hand, is entirely contributor driven, and it's a long process with Naeem Muhaimin here. He thinks it's actually, we can well say it's when Bombay was still Bombay, because it's a long process, right? Because it's
contributor driven.
Yeah.
Energy of contributors.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask about the processing by AI. By using AI, do you think, are there anything or any elements that will be deleted by using AI? I'd like to ask a kind of in a negative side of using AI for this project.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are many glitches in the project. Everybody in that room knows that these people are dead. So I think the negative side is that, so in one sense the transformation is not complete, right? Even though if you work very hard, a little bit the chin is too big or something, like there's always this kind of glitchy things. But so for us it was important to push, to use the latest version, 512 pixel face, use the latest deepfake. In fact, Deepface Lab is the standard for sort of this kind of work. There's a new Biden Trump movie. I don't know.
Buddies.
Like a buddies kind of thing. So there's this kind of stuff. It's all done. A lot of it mostly is done. If there are real actors involved, then they're mostly done with Deepface Lab, or they're using old footage and then getting them to speak different things. Things like that are being done. So I guess that the process is not total, and there's a lot of glitch things that you see if you look carefully, but it is enough that the casual observer would have some kind of emotional connect, like the daughter and the granddaughter of this person said, there were moments where I was, and actually the one that we thought was a worse rendering, the grandson said, no, that's that one of them is, we thought that it's not Khurshid who's good, but he thought Khurshid was very good, and so on. This kind of misrecognition. So we are playing on that line.
So, I mean, I thought something about the voice was a bit dissonant, but like the face, like I don't know how to say it in words, but the face seemed fine. However, like I think, you know, like going off of this, right, if I'm a family member, if I'm kind of seeing it, right, my perception, my memories, so it's like almost like a, you know, like my memories, my perceptions, my, you know, it's triggering, say, also like more bodily things like sound of the voice, perhaps the smell of the person, right? That makes the experience a bit whole, right? I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but just kind of, you know, thinking about it from a viewer point of view, and also it's something you created in collaboration with people. It's for like a small crowd, you know, so I'm just thinking about the audience experience. Well, it's not even audience, like I don't know how to say it, you know, family member experience.
Art world, the community, like,
the community experience, right? Like, I'm sure it will be, I mean, I don't know. How I see it is so different, right? Like, I don't have anything to fill.
Yeah.
2 days ago, I think, or a few days ago, someone tweeted that Aaron Schwartz would have been 39 years old today. You know, that kind of, I don't know if that matters to you or. So it's this kind of thing that you imagine that what would somebody have said, right? Or what would their position be? There's a lot of sort of cheesy versions of that, like I said, in, you know, like in deepfake world. But more, if you take it more seriously, like just extending that human presence, not in the usual sense that, okay, you're extrapolating from their mind, like, okay, what would they have grown into, kind of thing, but really more as just a presence who at least is able to check on what people are saying about them and to probably correct any misinterpretations or claims being made on their behalf. That's a minimum level of extended sort of presence. So we were playing with these kind of ideas. It's a very different project from the background we showed you, but this is much more this idea of making an artwork for like 12 people rather than for some abstract public. Right?
Yeah.
Shaina and Ashok, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking them for very patiently spending an evening with us.